Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Koen. How are you?
All good here. Welcome and welcome in my fat box.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here. Good to be back.
Yeah, because you were here 9 months ago, weren't
That's
you?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were discussing the findings of the Buyer Experience Study
Right.
2024 then. But
Yeah.
now we have news. We have a new one.
We have a new one
Yeah.
and a lot of new interesting findings, things we didn't even think about last year.
Yeah. But for those that weren't aware of the findings of the previous report, maybe we can go over a couple of key points that came out of that study. I believe it started by saying that there is a whole part of the market that is actually not in market, or the audience that you're trying to sell to.
Right.
Yeah. And then there is a fraction of the ones that are in market that is not willing to engage with you until a certain point in that cycle. Right?
Yeah. So last year, primary findings were around the fact that the buyer doesn't engage directly with sellers until about 2/3 of the way through the journey. So about 69, 70% of the way through the journey. And that means that they're spending the vast majority of the time that they're in market evaluating solutions on their own. Now, people have been talking about that for years. Saying that is not particularly new. But what our study also found is that buyers are actually making really important decisions during that period of time. So people have said they spend 2/3 of their journey researching. Yeah, they do, but they come to some conclusions before they talk to sellers. And one of the things that we hinted at last year was it looks like buyers are picking favorites because they end up talking to the ultimate winner first. And that happened about 80% of the time. And buyers also say they set their requirements 85% of the time before talking to sellers. And so, we were here last year, and last year also kind of replicated the year prior. So the 2023, we did the study just in North America. We were confident in our findings and we did the stats. I think we'll talk about the stats and the importance of that in a couple of minutes, but we did the stats the first year. We knew that what we had found were statistically reliable results. But what really matters is you replicate the study and you see if you find the same thing 2 years in a row, and we certainly did. Not only 2 years in a row, but across the world, APAC, Europe, North America.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and since then, the world kept evolving. And we tried to analyze what are the root causes or the causes for the things we found. But we didn't really spend a lot of time on, because it was still very early then, on the impact of AI. And well, we can also argue maybe the world wasn't in a safe place then, but it hasn't gotten any better since without going in that direction. But I mean, I think we are dealing with a lot of economic uncertainty. So I think that was more than enough reasons to kind of go back to our buyers and ask them about how they're buying today compared to maybe in the past. Now, what did we find?
So when we asked a very similar group of people, a similar set of people, even a larger set of people this year, we immediately looked at the results and saw that buyers said instead of engaging with sellers at 69% of the way through the journey, globally it was 61% of the way through the journey. That's a significant shift. And for those of us in the middle of the research who've been saying for a couple of years, buyers don't engage until 69%, seeing that shift so much gave me a bit of a heart attack. Am I going to have to change everything that I've been saying? Either did we somehow get it wrong or did it fundamentally change? And the question that we had to ask then was, if it shifted back earlier, does that mean buyers are now engaging before they pick a favorite and before they pick a winner? So that was the big question we had the minute we saw those answers. And then, we do this study every year because things are constantly changing. And every year there are new things to ask about. Every year there are ways of refining what we've done before. So that we can explain more of that behavior. So going into the year, that's what we wanted to do. Coming out of the initial results and seeing that shift in the point of first contact, we knew we had to do some more digging.
Yeah, and we certainly did. Okay, cool. So now we got that out of the way.
Yeah.
Data is right. I'd like to kind of go back to something that in the previous study we referred to many times. The LinkedIn Institute is using data from Ehrenberg Bass, and this the famous 95% thing. I think we used it as a method to kind of tell the market that there is a huge portion of the market that is actually not buying, not in market, that has some impact on the way you should go about doing marketing and sales. But there is data now, and we didn't maybe go into that direction of figuring out is the 95.5, are these accurate numbers? But this time we actually went there, right? We asked the question, and we found that it's actually not really 95.5. What did we find?
Yeah, so when we look at that, when you think about the 95.5 rule, which says, and it's a heuristic, right?
Yeah.
So that, crediting the folks who did that original research, they never said yours is 5%. They said, it's probably about 5%. And when they said in market, what they mean is about to buy, right? On the cusp of buying. So if you're in consumer marketing, then about to buy is everybody who's in market in any way, right? Because the buying timeframes are quite small. But if you're in B2B, what we know from the buyer research is that your buyers are in market for a year, or slightly under a year. And so they've got to be in market for a long time before they're just about to buy. The kind of main thing that 6sense does is we collect intent data, signals, buyer behavior data from all over the internet, literally hundreds of thousands of sources. And then we have a new customer. We take their most recent opportunities that they've worked, and we look back in time in all of that behavioral data that we have. And we look back, if their buying cycle's a year or 2 years, we look back that whole time and we ask the question, what does it look like when those accounts that became opportunities for you, what does it look like a year ago, a year and a half ago in that data? What does their consumption look like of information? How much traffic is on the vendor websites? All of those things. And then we build a predictive model that says, okay, if this is the behavior we're seeing from those accounts, that matches the behavior of an account that's early in the buying journey, awareness stage, or that matches the behavior over time of a company that's now right on the verge of buying. So we use that to build a predictive model, and then we label buying stages in that predictive model. And it's literally based on how likely is that account to become an opportunity for our customer. So if you're in the awareness stage, that means there's only 10 to 20% likelihood of you becoming an account or opportunity in the next 90 days, and then it goes up through the buying journey. So we have thousands of customers, and each customer, we're monitoring thousands of accounts. We had, at the time, the data set I was looking at had 19 million records. These 19 million are accounts that we're monitoring and for which we have produced a score that says I'm in the early, middle, or late stages of the buying journey. And so what we did with the research is we did random sampling of accounts in that data. If you just take a random sample, a slice of that 19 million, and then you ask the question, what stage are those accounts in? Then you get a number. Now, what you want to do in the research is do a lot of random samples like that, and then average over across those samples and ask the question, what do you see? What's the distribution of accounts across the buying journey? So that's what that research was. And what we saw very reliably is that about 60% of accounts in our customers' ideal customer profile target account lists are not in market. Now, a lot of our customers are SaaS companies. If they're SaaS companies, customers are probably on, buyers or users are on 2-year contracts. 50% of them are in year 1 on average, right? So that takes 50% of your audience out, another 10 or so percent who not going into market because they're not interested in changing anything. But even when we look at different industries, we see patterns that are very, very like that. So we looked across manufacturing companies, we looked across services, very, very similar patterns. So we didn't even, in the end research, there's really no reason to split them apart. They're essentially the same that way. So you get 60% not in market. The first 2 journey stages, 17% each, roughly, and it's plus or minus a couple, but you can think a third of your ICP. So 60% of your ICP not in market, another third of your ICP is in those first 2 stages, and then the last 2 stages where you're really within typically 90 days, 30 days of becoming an opportunity for somebody and then buying, that's about 6% total. So that matches the Ehrenberg-Bass 5% really nicely. But what we called our paper on it nuancing the 95.5, because what's really important is you understand that buyers are in market making their decisions. That third of your audience that's in the early stages, that's the only third that's really influenceable right now, right? And so if you don't know that, and if you're just thinking these 5% at the end, that 5% at the end, as we'll discuss and have discussed a little bit already, that 5% is too late to persuade.
Yep.
You know, your sales reps are in there, they can make some difference, but largely they've made up their mind. So if you want to be effective, you have to be focused on the 30%. You also, and this is the big point of the research, don't want to be spending all of your demand dollars
Yep.
on the 60% that aren't in market.
Mhm.
They're a year away from becoming revenue for you, even if you do some magic thing and kick them off into market, which isn't really what happens most of the time anyway.
But you said something very important. So the 60% should not be spending your demand gen dollar. The tendency that you often have is to think in binary terms. Like there's this first marketing does something, sales takes over, or you're in market and all of a sudden, or you're out of market, all of a sudden you're in market. You just explained there's a spectrum in between and everything. So the knee jerk might be, and we saw that happen over the last couple of years, that people take those numbers on face value.
Yep.
They say, okay, there's a portion in and out of market, and I'm going to spend my demand gen budget in function of those numbers. We're not saying that you should not be doing any marketing when to customers that are not in market, aren't we?
Yeah.
But that's not what we're saying. But it's a different type of marketing that you need to do, right?
And we'll talk about why that's so important. So one of the other key findings from this year's study, we saw glimpses of it in last year's. We dug into it more this year, and it's confirming things that have been in other studies, Bain and others. Buyers put on average, they're going to evaluate about 5 vendors. They put 4 of them on a day one shortlist.
Yeah.
So we literally asked, how many vendors did you put on the shortlist on day one of your journey? That's the question we asked. The answer comes 4. How many vendors did you evaluate? 5. Right? So if you're not on the day one shortlist, you're almost certainly not going to get a deal, because buyers buy from the shortlist, day one shortlist, 95% of the time. So again, we have that finding in our study. It's corroborated in a bunch of other research that's available also. So super solid data on that. So what that tells us is you have to be doing a very good job of marketing to the accounts that are not in market now, but the marketing that you're doing to them has to be different. And then we'll talk, I think, in a little bit about one of the other really key findings about your buyers and why they can put 4 of the 5 vendors on that short list. But your buyers are, if they're not in market right now, they're probably not going to engage really deeply with functional content that you have, and they're not looking at pricing and those kinds of things. That's not what's on their mind, but they want to keep up, and they want to understand what's happening in the marketplace. It's part of their job. And if you're not influencing them when they're not in market, you have you run the risk of not getting on that day one shortlist. So it's really important. But if you've got goals attached to your demand gen dollars of producing pipeline and revenue, you're not going to get it in the same fiscal year, primarily from the folks that are not in market yet.
Yeah. Even if you know all of this, and you need to think about as a marketing leader or CMO on how to organize even your marketing team, the knee-jerk could also be, okay, if this part of my marketing mix is not really helping drive immediate demand that I can convert and measure in all my systems, that you then you say, okay, we're going to focus again on more on my brand and my reputation, but that you put a bunch of people on that job and you put them in the traditional Marcom team far away from where the demand gen is happening and where the go-to-market strategies are being defined. There is a danger if, and on one hand, we're saying you should go back and focus on thought leadership content without expecting an immediate outcome, let alone a conversion, because that's not what. But there is a danger if you put those guys far away from GTM discussions that they're also living on an island. So.
Right, and I think it's really important that you kind of alluded to this a little bit ago, and I made up a term earlier this year called the semi-permeable membrane. That's between in market and out of market. So as you were kind of alluding to, the line between being in market and out of market It seems like it's a sharp line. It is not. And I think everybody who's been involved in a purchase, in their career, been around for a while, understands that a lot of times you'll get a legitimate process. You think, okay, we're going to go buy a new solution of this type, and you go out and market and you do it for a little bit, and then budget goes away, somebody goes away, something happens, and then you're not in market anymore. Priorities change, and that happens. And then 6 months later, you're back in market, and then you're out, and then you're in. So that's happening all the time. And every time a buyer goes into market for a little while and they do some research, you're changing their mind, they're being influenced, but you may never see it. And you're certainly not talking to them. Your sales reps are not talking to them about it. So it's happening all the time. They're coming in and out of market, and really, really important decisions get made the minute they do. But then those decisions go away because the buying process goes away, and then it starts up again another time.
Yeah. Let's go back to when we were talking about when we were after the scare and the panic, when we saw the numbers come in and it's buyers are engaging again earlier, because let's face it, we were all assuming that's just going to be the opposite. AI, we thought with AI and LLMs, we're going to even wait later or longer before we engage with sellers. We found the opposite. So let's talk a little bit about the AI impact.
Questions that we asked in the original survey where we asked, did you use LLMs in the process of your buying? 94% said yes. So that your immediate thought is, okay, that's got to be it. But then we have some other things, right? So we also, we just looked at the 6% of buyers who said that they did not use LLMs, and then 94% who did, and asked the question, when did they engage? Is that different? It is different. But buyers who didn't use LLMs engaged earlier, not later, which tells us right off the top, it can't be using LLMs that's driving buyers to do it earlier. But we also asked, when in your buying journey did you use LLMs? And they could pick multiple. And I think a lot of the buyers did pick multiple places. But what's interesting is the number of buyers who said that we used them in the middle of the buying journey as opposed to the early buying journey was statistically and meaningfully larger. So buyers were more likely to be using them in the middle of their journey than the beginning. So like 45 in the beginning, 55 or 56 or something in the middle, and then hardly any LLM usage at the end of the buying journey. So it's mostly in those early 2 stages, but more in the middle than the end. And then the use cases that they were using them for, are all of the things that you would expect, right? So synthesize information for me. Give me a table that shows the key decision factors that we should be looking at for vendors. But I think when we think about this, we all have to think about how we use LLMs and what's useful about them for us and what is not that useful. And I think for the most part, when we're using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and we're having them engage on a topic that we know well, you end up having to correct the LLMs a lot, right? You have to say, no, that's not right. Go put it back. So we might be thinking about buying a car or something like that. And we've got 3 or 4 models. We've already done a bunch of research on that cars. We bought cars many times. And this is very much like B2B buyers. So we might be saying, okay, well, put these 4 cars, go find the information on these 4 cars, put it in a table, and here's the 10 things I want you to list out. And you get that thing back, and it's not the 10 things you asked for. It's 6 things and then 4 other things that it thought of. And then it's incomplete, and there's some wrong information. That's what we experience day in and day out with these things. Same thing in B2B. It's not getting everything right. You have to go tell it what put there. So why is that useful? Well, otherwise, I'd have to type out the whole damn thing, right? So it's easier for me to prompt the LLM and to correct it and then have it give me this nice table than it is for me to type out that whole thing. And I don't have to go to all the websites all the time, pick all that stuff out. So it's still useful. It still saves a lot of time. It's not substituting for going to vendor websites. And so
a lot of people are thinking that it is changing and replacing part of that, right? Because if you challenge an LLM, you can only do that if you're informed.
Right.
I mean, otherwise you believe everything that's
right.
spitting out.
Yeah, and you would be made to look very foolish very quickly if that's what you did.
Yeah.
I think we all know that.
Yeah.
And yet, you see so many people online saying, oh, LLMs are taking over and buyers are just using LLMs or agents are talking to agents. They may at some point, It's conceivable. That is absolutely not happening now. Because now you think about what's going on in a B2B buying process. If you're the budget holder, you're the ultimate decision maker for this thing. You're buying something that's $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, $1 million bucks. This is a really risky moment for you as a professional. You're making
Absolutely.
a big decision that's going to impact you, your department, your company. Absolutely nobody is trusting the primary research on that to a third party. In fact, you consult real third parties, but you're not going to offload that primary research to ChatGPT right now. You're just not going to do it. That doesn't make any sense. Nobody's getting the readout from ChatGPT and walking over to the CFO's office and saying, "This is what I'd like to buy." Right? You may have that readout and say, "Hey, I've got a readout. You can look at all of that stuff we put in it." But I am the one who made sure that all of that stuff was right, and I knew that stuff going in. So, they're useful. But then we also, in our survey, we ask, how many interactions did you have with vendors across your buying journey? We've been asking that for 3 years. That hasn't changed. So the number of interactions with vendors, digital, human, same numbers it's been for the last 3 years. The use of LLMs is additional to what people have been doing before, but not a substitute.
Yep.
The other thing it's not a substitute for yet is using consultants and analysts to help out in that buying process. So we've seen in the past where buyers, about 70% of buyers say they worked with analysts or consultants during that buying process. That number went up to 77% this year, right? So it's additional right now to the buying process. I think we're a long way from it substituting for real primary research on the part of the buyer. But then I'm sure we'll get to it. There's other things we have to think about the buyer that really explain more of this.
Yeah, one of the dangers actually, I think it comes from the world of psychology. It's a German word, but it's used by everyone. It's called Hineininterpretieren, where you predict what's going to come in the future based on your experience from the past. And I think a lot what's happening right now about SEO, LLM optimization, that the way people were using a search engine in the past and the way it was producing outcomes, that the way we think we need to kind of see LLMs, that we're substituting the Google search now with LLM. But I think we're going to start using it differently, because not when you're doing B2B buying, but as a consumer outside of your working hours, what you were just saying, the outcomes that an LLM gives you, you challenge it because you sometimes just don't trust the answers. And if that starts, you start realizing that in your personal life, that will have an impact on your business decisions as well, right? So
absolutely
the book hasn't been written on how people will behave with these things as these LLMs also become quote unquote smarter or dumber. I mean, whatever label we give it.
Yeah. There's the folks at LinkedIn are doing some good research around this. They call buyability, but the truth about B2B buying is, in many cases, it's as emotional or more emotional of a process as consumer buying. But the emotions are different. When you're buying things in your consumer life, for the most part, unless it's like insurance, you're buying things because you want to acquire something, right? You want to have something that you like or you want, or it's going to be useful. When you're buying in B2B, your primary emotions are, especially when times are tough, are more negative. They're avoidance. We need a solution to do this. Maybe I'm excited about what it's going to do for us, but I'm also very concerned that it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, the implications for me are much, much bigger than if I get a washing machine I don't like. Right? Yeah. And so there's a different set of emotions. They're really important, and they drive the decision-making process in B2B such that you have to be trusted. You have to be, as LinkedIn is now putting, you have to be buyable. And that's a group decision, which makes it even more.
So it's much more complex. A lot of people are now saying, well, with search, you had like a couple of options that you got through Google. Now the LLM will give you one. And if you're not that one, you have a huge problem. That's simplifying way too much, right?
Yeah, so I think we have to bring in a couple of other things that we did in the research. So one of the things we started to see last year, we asked one question about, we asked buyers, were you familiar with the brand that you bought before you started this buying process? And almost everybody said yes, which was a surprise to us. We hadn't thought about that. So we dug into that more this year. And, so we asked, how many buying cycles have you been in, partial or complete, in the category that you're talking to us about? If they were telling us about a CRM purchase in CRM, how many times have you been through a buying process in that? Understanding that it could have been a partial one, a few months. And the number was staggering. We had to check this number a bunch of times. We checked it against the socially desirable, responding, all of that, because it was 8.5. Yeah. So the average buyer in B2B, and this, by the way, this was the same number you get if you asked the person who identified themselves. If they were telling us about, if they were saying, I was the financial ratifier, I work in the CFO's office. My role in this buying process was as the financial evaluator of this solution. It wasn't my department, right? It was the marketing department buying it. The number of times that they say they've been through buying processes for that marketing thing, 8.5, right? IT guy, same thing, right? And in fact, CFOs, I think CFO, ultimate decision maker, and the purchasing folks had the highest numbers. So the ultimate decision maker, the person who owns that department, they're probably somebody in their 40s or so who has been in their role in that function for their entire careers. They've been through many evaluation processes. But these other support functions for the buying process, it's what they do for a living. So they can say that not just about the marketing solutions, but about everything, every part of the company. Certainly the purchasing people, but also finance, because they're involved in every meaningful purchase. So that's something that, one, it was surprising to see the number, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? And so we wrote a thing a year ago called No Blank Slates. Our buyers are not blank slates. There's not starting from scratch. And we dug much deeper on that this year. So your buying group, if you've got 10 people in a buying group, the average number of times every member of that buying group has evaluated stuff in your category is 8. And the people who are the primary decision makers, the 4 or 5 people who are most important, it's even more than that. So that's why they can tell you that they put 4 of the 5 vendors on the short list on day one. It's also why you don't have to worry about, if you're an existing brand in an existing space, you don't have to worry about whether you show up in ChatGPT or whatever to get on the day one shortlist, because that's not how the day one shortlist gets formed.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it never was, right? The only place it is, and there are people who will be watching this who will say, wait a minute, my category's only been around for 2 years. Yes, your buyers have to go searching. Now, they probably heard about you from peers or others, right? So it's not just Google and ChatGPT. It doesn't entirely depend on them. But for most people watching this, your category's been around a while. Your buyers have been operating in that category for as long as it's been around. It's part of their job, and they're not Googling you to find out if you exist. And then that whole, we could talk about this too, that whole mythology that the beginning of a buying process is general research, and I'm trying to understand the category and all of that. No, I'm 45 years old. I've evaluated these things 8 times. I know which vendor I want to buy. And the beginning of my buying process, the reason that I'm not Googling you in the beginning of my buying process is I don't need to. I put your URL into the browser and I go. And I'm looking for information not to educate myself about you, maybe to update myself, but largely what I'm doing is think about the dynamic. You've got 10 people in a buying group on average. Every one of them's got a whole bunch of experience in the category. So what does that mean? If you have human beings who have experience, what does that mean? It means they're not going to have the same opinions. And there's going to be, if you put 4 vendors on the short list on day one, assume there's 4 different opinions at least about what the company should be doing in that buying process. So the buying process from that point forward is 10 people who are trying to position their favorite vendor to be the one that gets picked, right? And I think once anybody hears this and thinks about their own experience as a buyer, you're going to go, yeah, okay, that's it. Especially if you're the ultimate decision makers. Your department, you want to buy this thing, you know what you want, probably on day one. Maybe you're could be this one, could be this one. Certainly not all 5 are real competitors. And you're spending that buying journey trying to get the one that you want over the line. And that's why it takes so long. It's also why when we get to the point where we talk about what happens in that point of first contact and consensus, that it is a really solid consensus when it finally happens.
Talking about that first point of contact and going back to Why did it move back
Right.
earlier? You and I were having a conversation when we found out the data about buyers probably have questions about AI. And if they're buying something, okay, now there is this AI thing hovering above our heads. What's the impact of AI? Because it's not just only relevant for tech companies that might embed a piece of AI technology in there, because I remember I was giving you the example of that law firm, right?
This was the kind of the thing that set us up, because we were trying to think like what's going on in the world
Yeah.
that might cause this if it's not this. And I think all of us thought, well, there's a lot of economic uncertainty and things are roiling, so that we kind of knew we were going to look at that. And I forget how it came up, but the other thing that's different for everybody is now there's AI inside of everything. And to your point, well, it's not always inside, but if you're a services firm, undoubtedly, you as a service are under pressure to use AI to deliver your service more efficiently, lower cost to yourself. But your customers may not want that for a variety of reasons. They don't want their data being put into an LLM. I don't want to, I think what you said, which was what triggered all of this, I don't want to pay $300 an hour for an LLM. I get ChatGPT myself, $20 a month, right? So so when you said that and we thought about that, we thought, I think this is something that everybody's dealing with. And how exactly it would impact the buying process, we didn't know. That's what we had to go find out. But it was like, certainly everybody's dealing with the economy. And now this is like a big sea change for everything.
Yeah.
And when you think about what the pressure that people are under right now is to be more efficient, to have lower personnel costs, but to get the same or better work done. And that's what the promise of Gen AI is. And I think everybody's under pressure to get that. We certainly hear that from our prospects and customers. And so once you gave me that example, I thought, okay, we got to go. This is what we got to go find out.
But it could mean that it's temporary, because the fact that we are the first point of contact is earlier. If the AI inside would be the reason, because I think in a couple of years from now, we will not have to ask anyone anymore. It will be known or not known to what extent in a particular category AI. The vendor will probably proactively already explain it. So I'm already interested in the next study to see where this is going. But what I would like to end with is, you mentioned it several times, economic uncertainty.
Yeah. So, and these two things are really working together. So when we put together another survey, and fortunately I was able to get some more budget, go out and ask a different set of buyers questions about, one, their process. So we asked all of the questions about the length of the process, point of first contact, all of that. And when we asked it, all of it checked out to be exactly the same as the other survey. Again, validation of what we found in the first one. But then we also asked, did the length of your buying cycle change because of economic uncertainty? Well, first of all, we asked, are you feeling economic uncertainty? And the answer is yes for everybody. And then, okay, if you did, how did it impact the buying process? And so a net 17 or so percent, I think it was, said that their buying process was shortened because of economic uncertainty. Now, when I first mentioned that to a lot of people outside of the study, their response is, wait a minute, I thought that economic uncertainty slows things down. And there were about a third of respondents said that their buying process was longer, but 40-something% said it was shorter. When you think about what it's like to be a business person right now, and if you get budget at the beginning of your year, and that budget is set aside to buy a piece of technology or a solution of some kind that's going to help you achieve your goals this year, that you're under pressure because of the economy to achieve, you want to get that done as fast as possible. You want to get it done as fast as possible to get it in-house and start getting the benefit and presumably the AI benefit of it, but also because if you don't use that budget now, it could very well get taken away if things continue to go south. So it does make a lot of sense that the buying process would get compressed by this economic uncertainty. Also, that a lot get canceled. So our survey just talked to people who completed a buying process. Undoubtedly, many, many, many more were canceled altogether, but the ones that are completed go faster. And then, we also asked, did you engage with sellers earlier because of economic uncertainty? 44%, net 44% said yes. So that was dramatically more people say it was shortened or that they engaged earlier, which on its own would be a little bit of a head scratcher if we didn't already also know about AI inside. So we asked, did the timing of your engagement with sellers change because of the need to evaluate AI inside the solutions? So it was a neutral question. We weren't leading the witness. And that was a net 40-something% of buyers said, yeah, we engaged earlier. And we also asked, what did you have to evaluate? And we also asked the extent to which they needed or wanted it. So in all cases, buyers really expected and wanted AI inside. 89% of the things that buyers bought had some sort of AI component, either inside or in the service or even in the hardware, particularly if it was computer hardware, that it was either built by AI, formed by AI, or had some AI component to it. So we've got this thing where we know everybody's got AI inside or wants AI inside. They know they've got to evaluate it. Now, we've just said buyers are extremely experienced in evaluating these solutions. But what's the one thing that they've never evaluated before? Gen AI inside those solutions. They haven't done that before. So they're under pressure. They want to get this thing done fast. They need to get this thing in-house and get the benefit from it, but they haven't evaluated this inside. And they know that there's a lot of things that they're going to have to do. Their companies got policies now about AI inside the things that you buy. How is it training data? Where does that data reside? All of the InfoSec concerns about that. But the number one question that buyers had about AI inside was, what's it doing? What's it? What are the capabilities of it? And when you go look at vendor websites, which we did, I had ChatGPT look at 200 B2B websites and rate them for clarity of discussing AI. The results were not good. We're getting a C-D grade on talking about AI.
That would be walking into another year, getting older again. That would be a very, very important recommendation, right, for marketers to kind of pay attention to that aspect and be more transparent about that on your website.
Yeah,
wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. And I think most companies are not really sure yet what their thing is doing. I think that's part of it. Is okay, we got to say we got AI inside because everybody says they want it, and we're gonna have to figure that out as we go. So there's a lot of
because it's much more than just putting some text on your website. You need to actually think about it.
What's it gonna be?
What you're gonna be?
Yeah. So I mean, when you wrap all of that stuff up. Then we did the math with that survey and said, okay, now can we build a model that explains why that moved backward, and we can account for virtually all of the variability in the engagement with sellers based on that. Buyers needed to engage with sellers to understand what the AI was doing, all of the security issues. And what's clear is they thought it was going to take longer to do. What appears to be the case is that it didn't. And that, because the cycle still ended up being shorter, it really didn't take that much longer. The other thing that's really interesting, so, we asked buyers a very specific question. Did you put your shortlist in order of preference before you talked to sellers? And 94% of buyers said yes. So that's the most direct question we've asked. And we had the socially desirable responding questions in there, and we looked at the correlation there, no correlation. In fact, a slightly negative correlation. People kind of understand that they probably shouldn't, but they all tell you that they did anyway. We asked a question about how likely were you to change your opinion after talking to sellers? Buyers say, oh, we were very likely to change, or we were very open to changing our opinion. That correlates highly with the socially desirable responding. People know they're supposed to say that. But when you look at their behavior, 23% changed their decision after talking to sellers, 77% buy the vendor that was the top of the short list before they talked to sellers. I'm really glad we got to talk about methods because it's really important that we see all of these little nuances about how decisions are being made. It's the air we breathe, right?
But we're throwing a lot of data and numbers and conclusions to our audience, and we're walking into a new year. We don't want to scare anyone with this stuff, but I would actually highly recommend everyone to actually dive much deeper in those studies, and not just the global study we're talking about, right? There were like we collaborated on the Western European part of the data, and we dove a little bit deeper. So there's a different report on that, but there are many more deeper dives, right?
That's right. So we have a main global report, and it's 5,000 words. It's a big report, but we have 3 other reports. So APAC report, UK, Ireland, and then Western Europe. And there are interesting nuances. The main story is the same everywhere, but interesting nuances. And if you live in those places and work in those places, the nuances matter a lot. And then we have 9 other reports. So we have 9 other deep dive reports, we call them. They're linked from inside the main report. But for instance, we do a deep dive on just how experienced buyers are and what impact does that have. We do a deep dive on the impact of AI. We do a deep dive on the impact of economic uncertainty. So that, if you want to dive into those specific topics more deeply, you can. And we're going to be producing more. We've probably got another 4 or 5 reports we'll produce from the same set of data.
Yeah. But there's one thing for everyone, and for those who weren't involved the first time around, or didn't know about the study. There's one thing that actually we keep seeing, right? The results are fairly consistent across all the geographies, right? Because sometimes when we talk to people, this is a study coming from a vendor in the IT industry, and they're North American, and in Europe things are different. We can actually say that isn't the case, right? Most of those numbers about first point of contact, there's slight, to your point, slight nuances, but across the board, we're pretty consistent wherever you are in the world.
Very consistent. And there's a reason for that. Most companies are global in one way or another. They're buying from global companies, or they are global companies themselves. And so those processes tend to get flattened out. And we've seen that over the last couple of years in APAC, most particularly. A couple of years ago, APAC results were quite different from North America, much longer processes. But we've seen, I think, under the stress of economic uncertainty, that APAC buying journeys really now look just like everywhere else already. So, those things tend to get ironed out because companies are global. They have processes, and the processes just have to be run. Again, there's interesting things about how things work in different countries. And we started, thanks with your team, we looked at some of those interesting things just between, say, Benelux countries last year. Those are interesting if you're working in those regions, but the main story is the main story, and it's the same.
So if you compare where we are right now, the first study, we had a clear message. You said, focus a little bit more on the reputation side because you've been neglecting this, and the branding, give this more importance. And the second kind of outcome or recommendation we had is stop gating content in that phase and stop chasing MQLs because this buying group, that was a crystal clear recommendation we could give. Right now, I got the feeling there's so much more, and it's not really clear. I mean, at least that's why I'm not ending this podcast with give me 5 recommendations you could give, because there's probably not 5, there's probably hundreds of them.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And so I think I'm looking forward actually to 2026, because now with the data that we have, we need to start having deeper debates on, because nobody's written the book, right? So everybody's saying the playbook is broken.
Yeah.
That's easy to say if it's broken, but what is the new book going to look like? And so,
and if somebody tells you that they have the new one now, walk away, run away, because they don't. They don't have one. Nobody's got that yet. I think, there are a number of things that we'll be talking about as we move into 2026, and especially early in the year. So one of the things that we've hinted at today is, so we know that buyers are using AI. We know that buyers are also using vendor content just as much as before when they're in market. We also know that buyers or vendors are losing a lot of web traffic. And so the assumption has been that they're losing web traffic and buyers are not coming when they're in market. Okay, we know that that's not true. Your buyers, when they're in market, are coming to your website, same as before. Today's pipeline's not down because of ChatGPT. But we also said buyers put 4 of the 5 vendors on their short list on day 1. So it seems very likely that they're not coming to your website unless they're in market, right? And in between times, they're not. We don't know that for sure, but that's what it looks like. So there's things that we need to find out about that, and things that we need to test, and things that we need to understand about how buyers are behaving in that period of time before they go into market, because they make decisions on day one that are going to impact what they do. If you're in a field that has 6 or 7 competitors, you've got a really big risk of not being on the day one shortlist if you're not present with them when they're not in market. And it looks very much like that's the set of people who are not coming to your website anymore. And that's not going to be just a matter of everybody wants to talk about engineering your website for LLMs. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. So this is what, things I think we need to talk about. I think what I'm kind of now fond of telling people is I don't think you're losing traffic to LLMs. I think you're losing it to boringness, to being boring and being irrelevant to your buyers. There's nothing there for them to see except your self-promotion. And that's not very interesting for these experienced buyers. So there's more to know there. A lot of that's just my opinion and conjecture right there. So, we're going to do more to dig out what the facts are and come back and be able to talk about them.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to the many events we will be organizing, because we're obviously already planning them. You'll be back in a couple of weeks, months from now. Thanks, Gary, for coming over. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I love coming.
Thank you.
Cheers.